Right, firstly, thank you so much to Marta and the team for inviting me to Warsaw to speak to you today about public toilets. It's a subject that you will soon find out is passionate in my life, maybe somewhat slightly obsessed. Is translation happening? Yeah, okay, brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to my presentation, which is Future Inclusive Toilets, Making Your Provision Fit for Purpose. We'll give you an overview of some of the issues that we found in our research. Oh, right, yes. So today I will share with you my background in UK toilet research, what we mean by access, why toilets are important for access, why toilets need to be accessible, the conflicts that we found in provision, because there's lots of them, and this equates to conflicts in design. How public toilets can be a public service towards public health, but need to be publicly accessible. I'm then going to give you an overview of how we can improve access through design, and this brings together architecture plus product plus service, which together makes the design of a toilet more inclusive. At the end, I'm going to talk you through a project we did with the London Mayor called Engaged, and then finally I'll give you some key points for fit toilet provision. So as you know, I'm Joanne. I'm Professor of Accessible Design at the Royal College of Art, and I work with a woman called Gail Ramster, who's a designer and trained in anthropology. I co-lead the Public Toilets Research Unit, and this is based, oh, sorry. There we go. This is based at the Helen Hammond Centre for Design, which is the RCA's longest running research centre. We focus on involving people directly in the design process through inclusive design. And the PTRU is currently the only research unit in the UK focused on public toilet design research. That one, there we go. So, my work in toilets began with the inclusive design of public toilets in city centres, which was part of a large consortium called Vivacity. And this specifically looked at the toilet provision for disabled people. We involved over 500 people in this project through focus groups, interviews and surveys. The project was instigated because at that time the UK was bringing in Part 3 of the Disability Discrimination Act, which was access to goods and services, which meant that a lot of services had to start providing public toilets or publicly disabled access toilets. So to assess how well the implementation of accessible toilets was going, we designed a toilet audit tool, and we identified 50 design features of the accessible toilet, both in architecture, product and service. And we looked at this tool. It was the actual recommendations, the actual aspects of the tool were based on the legal recommendations of the time and the best practice as advised by the British standards. Maybe we need to change the battery. Hey! So, we audited 101 accessible toilets around England, and out of that 101, we found that, ta-da! Sorry, everyone. Here we go. We found that 0, absolutely none, had incorporated all the 50 design recommendations that we had identified, and this was a huge issue. From this research, we wrote it up in the accessible toilet design resource, and I'll give you information of where you can find this. It's still downloadable, and is still pretty much used by a lot of people. So, my next project with Gail, where I met Gail, was called Challenging Environmental Barriers to Continence, and this was part of another big research consortium called TACT3, which was promoting ageing continence. And this research works and looked at specifically the toilet provision for older people. So we involved over 120 people in this project, and specifically in this project, we included the providers of toilets, because we wanted to know what some of the issues they faced were with provision. So one of the key findings that we had from this project was that providers had difficulty communicating their information about provision, and users had difficulty finding information on provision. So to try and meet this information and communications shortfall, we designed the Great British Public Toilet Map. To date, we have over 14,000 toilets on our database, which is now the largest database of toilets in the UK. It's accessible to both providers and users, the public, so they can make additions and update the information. This year is our 10th anniversary, and we have decided to change the name to just Toilet Map, because we have ambitions to take this global. We're ambitious. We also produced publicly accessible toilets design guide, and we recently updated this to consider how facilities post-pandemic are not only safer but inclusive. Oh. So we found that there's a lot of information about toilet design out there, but sometimes it's hard to locate. So we also created TINKLE, which stands for Toilet Innovation and New Knowledge Exchange, which usually makes people laugh, because obviously TINKLE is a British euphemism for having a wee, going to the toilet. So we've created this as bringing together all the resources, all our resources, other researchers' resources, and so that's accessible to all architects and designers who might be interested in the subject. Our next project was called Engaged and was funded by the Mayor of London as part of his Designing London's Recovery initiative. I'll share more on this towards the end of the presentation. It never ends, my life is really in the toilet, trust me. We also have a company, it's called Public Convenience Limited, and this actually oversees the business of looking after our toilet map. And one of the ways that we do this is through consultancy work with public organisations mostly. This toilet here was one that we consulted for a major London museum to ensure that it was accessible to as many people as possible. It was a whole suite of toilets, including changing places toilets. And finally, Gail and I have written a book. We are in the final stages of finishing the edits. It's called Designing Inclusive Toilets, We the People, and is aimed at designers, providers and policymakers, and hopefully members of the public, and will be published by Bloomsbury in spring 2025. So our research takes a holistic perspective. We basically put it forward that you are going to need the toilet the minute you leave your home. But what do we mean by access? Well, for many people, the physical access to toilets causes a huge problem. This might be because they use a wheelchair, and there is either no provision or it has been poorly implemented. Or perhaps they have visual impairments and can't see clearly the signs or even the furnishings. or perhaps they experience both. Because what is important is to recognise that for many people, their disability isn't a single issue. It might be compounded by other health conditions, such as arthritis in their hands, making certain products difficult to use, especially for our ageing disabled population. More recently, we've been looking at public toilets as supporting emotional reactions to the city, as a place to withdraw from city life, a place to stop and take a breath. This is especially important for neurodiverse people, although there are some elements of the toilet that they find extremely distressing, such as loud hand dryers. But we also need to consider social access. How do we support the unhoused and homeless with toilet provision? How do we meet the needs of people from the trans and non-binary communities? Does our toilet provision, as it stands, really meet the needs of families? Mothers using toilets with sons, fathers with daughters. And what about the children? Whilst baby change is common, the needs of children in our city's toilet provision are completely overlooked. And what should we do? Indeed, should we even design in considerations of drug users? In Canada, they have recognised this as a problem with drug overdoses in public toilets and have developed a safer bathroom initiative. Because we have to recognise that everyone needs the toilet. And normal aspects of toilet use is that we can need a toilet up to 9 times a day. Ideally, it's about 4 to 6 times for the bladder. For the bowel, it can be anything from 3 times a day to 3 times a week. Women and non-binary people often need the toilet more due to pregnancy, menstruation and menopause. Men and non-binary people need it more due to prostate problems. In the UK, and all of my research is UK-based, as you may have guessed, there are 12 million people aged over the age of 65. And what happens with ageing is that because the bladder weakens, you need to go more often, you can't hold your urine for much longer, so you need to reach the facilities faster, and this may be complicated by the need that you have to overcome your mobility concerns. But some people need the toilet more than others. We have 14 million people in the UK with a bladder condition. We have 6.5 million people with a bowel condition. And these conditions are found to predominantly affect women. Over half the population in the UK is now made of women, and we have historically had less provision than men. We also have 16 million disabled people, of which 8% use wheelchairs, and again, there is a sort of discrepancy in gender that a majority are women. The UK public toilets have traditionally been owned and operated by councils, be it county, town and parish. However, the majority of our provision is now in the private sector, and this sees a shift from a historically civic public service to a private one. And in effect, we have gone from providing public toilets to publicly accessible toilets. And here we see one of the challenges of this shift. From public to public accessible, who does that include? Well, private providers, like train stations and motorway services, usually offer general access to all. Many local authorities have partnered with private providers to provide community toilet schemes. But this includes private restrictions to access. A provider, an owner, business owner, can deny entry. And we have found that some small businesses might not be as accessible as required for public accessible toilets. So why are public toilets important for access? Well, in the UK, they have to be provided by law. This is set out in our building regulations, which encourage an inclusive design approach. We also have the British standards, which is considered best practice, but is not legally binding. And more recently, we have a draft legal document called Part T, Toilets, which gives directions on gendered and gender-neutral provision, which the current government is calling universal provision. You can ask me about that later. So this ensures that our built environment is accessible. It enables people to leave home with confidence, especially older people, disabled people and families. It enables people to travel further with confidence, especially those with bladder and bowel conditions. It makes the city and our towns more welcoming for visitors and tourists. And it's an important element for public health as it provides hand washing and prevents street fouling. Toilets are also vital for active economies, for earning money, especially for the increasing mobile workforce, such as delivery drivers, taxi drivers, maintenance workers, community nurses and cycle delivery. But it's also important for spending money, enabling people to spend more time away from home on local high streets, travel beyond their local areas and to attend many of the activities and events that town and city centres put on. Toilets are also vital for active lives, for health and well-being, exercising in the city green spaces and taking part in local sports, for active travel to reduce car use, such as walking and cycling. Many people trip chain, meaning they make multiple stops in their time away from home, and this might be dropping off children at school, going to work, shopping and visiting elderly relatives. And women are more likely to trip chain as they still predominantly are the carers of children and older people. They are also more likely to use public transport. And as we've already established, they are also more likely, due to biology and health factors, more likely to need the toilet. Toilets are also vital for local living. Whilst there may be adequate public toilet provision, can often be sidelined. But it is key to supporting our ageing populations so that they can have confidence when popping out for shopping or beginning a longer journey. However, what we have found is that locally there can be toilet deserts in which only the town centre is served and not the journey to the town centre. Provision becomes a postcode lottery based on where you live, and for many older people, this can mean not only limiting their time away from home, but actually preventing them from leaving home at all. So toilet research and design has attempted to make accommodations for disabled people and older people. But what about the children? UNICEF have developed a child-friendly cities initiative to make the cities more equitable and accessible to children. Whilst not explicit, one way this can be met is by making toilets more child and family friendly. Exactly. Whilst baby changing is prevalent, even in men's toilets, and we need to go beyond this and meet the needs of young children, as they need access to toilets in comfort and safety too. So we need to make public toilets accessible to as many users as possible, to meet the diversity of residents' needs, to encourage a diversity of visitors, to meet the needs of workers, to keep our streets clean, and to offer the toilet experience that is private, safe and comfortable. However, making toilets accessible also raises conflicts in provision. Toileting, after all, is a very private act in public space. And whilst our toilets' needs might be met in the daytime, what about the night time? Our evening economies also need toilets. Whilst we may use the toilet before we leave the restaurant, the concert or event, what about the journey home? Using public transport because we've decided not to have a drink, is there a toilet en route when we're going home, or do we just have to hold it until we get there? Or do we have no choice but to find an alleyway? There is also an issue of legitimate and illegitimate use. How do we provide toilets in the evening and make sure they're not used for non-toileting activities? This presents a serious dilemma for providers, as well as a dilemma for designers, and a dilemma for users. Can they trust nighttime provision, if there is any, and is it safe? At the turn of the millennium, providing urinals became one of the key innovations in meeting evening provision. This is the Eurolift. It came up at dusk and went down at dawn. Obviously, it only meets the needs of a certain population, and amongst them, we found that many older men would not use them. Men in wheelchairs couldn't use them. Men who had pareiuresis, also known as shy bladder, couldn't use them. Men who observed hygiene considerations due to faith preferred not to use them. And of course, over half the population, women, couldn't use them. So this expensive innovation only really met the needs of a small number of people. And with no alternatives offered for women, this modern intervention ended up echoing the historical toilet provision of urinals for men only, symbolically promoting the city as a male space. As a private space in public, we also have to consider other activities that may take place in toilets. For example, graffiti in lavatories is almost a historical behaviour and even has its own term, latrinalia, to describe it. Whilst intravenous drug use is also prevalent in toilets, but this might also be for medical purposes. To design out non-toileting behaviours, some providers install blue lights so that veins in arms can't be seen. But researchers describe this as a form of symbolic violence due to drug use, for drug users, against drug users, as it often results in risky injection practices that can lead to overdose and death. Our research found that it made the facility inaccessible to those with visual impairments and those who found such overload of sensory experiences disturbing, whilst police researchers found that some of the blue lights created an erotic ambience, encouraging sexual liaisons in toilets and effectively replacing one non-toileting activity with another. Here we see how the conflict in provision leads to a conflict in design. How do we design for access and yet ensure the toilets are robust for all potential uses and possible abuses? The toilet on the left is a great example of an accessible toilet made inaccessible by the use of blue light. Not behind me. Whilst the toilet on the right, photographed when it was fairly new, can be problematic for people with visual impairments and actually frightening for people for people with dementia. Stainless steel is also very hard to keep clean, and in a public environment with heavy footfall is no doubt a bit of a nightmare for the toilet attendants too. We're also finding that our traditional gender-segregated toilets can be problematic, especially for families. I was once in a toilet queue with a mum who had her young son with her, and he was insistent that he did not want to go into the ladies because he was a boy. Now, because toilets have a bad reputation, his mum was insistent that he had to go with her. And it was obviously this eruption, this tantrum, for want of a better word, was causing both of them a lot of distress. So often mums with sons and dads with daughters will use the unisex accessible toilet, but have told us that they do so under a sense of guilt because they know these are toilets for disabled people and not ones that socially they really should be using. So the lack of family provision often puts pressure on disabled facilities. But meanwhile, younger people tend to be more acceptable to desegregating toilet provision. However, many older people are really not comfortable with this. And in the UK, we have seen a move towards gender-neutral provision, which our draft building regulations Part T aims to address. But in many instances, it has resulted in existing facilities just rebranding with new signage, but not redesigning the existing provision. Many women, whilst comfortable with the thought of gender-neutral provision, are uncomfortable walking into a space that has urinals. After all, for many women, it's a space we've never been in before, although we've used hundreds of public toilets. Equally, many men, also comfortable with the idea of gender-neutral provision, are uncomfortable with the thought of women walking behind them while standing at the urinal. So there is a need to redesign toilets to meet everyone's needs. A cubicle that is fully enclosed preferably with its own wash basin, which will meet the needs of menstrual cups, which are considered a sustainable alternative to pads and tampons, as well as ensuring privacy, comfort and security, and making toileting in public a pleasant experience. But sometimes it still all goes wrong. So this provision here, which I'm standing in front of, I'm just going to move around a bit. Yay. So this provision here, lovely, fully enclosed provision, but somebody made a complaint and one of the toilets was designated ladies, for the ladies only. And we wondered, well, why has this happened? You know, it's fully enclosed, it's got the wash basin, it's got everything that we would recommend. And we wondered if it was simply because the symbol on the toilet, the figures on the toilet, reminded the user who the next user would be. So what we recommend, and what the Alzheimer's Society in the UK recommend, is that you just put a symbol of a toilet on the door, because that's how people with dementia recognise toilet facilities. It's a toilet, and at the end of the day, it's just a toilet. The Royal Society of Public Health found that a lack of toilets to support the active lives I mentioned earlier could be linked to rising obesity, and this is a huge public health issue in the UK. Our recent experience of lockdowns emphasised just how essential public toilets are. Our nationwide closures affected many of the people who still had to work, especially nurses and care workers, the majority of whom were women. It also removed the infrastructure for hand washing, which we were strongly encouraged to do. In the UK, it considerably raised the incidence of street fouling. There were even reports of toilets being broken into just to be used. No, wrong one. Toilets are also essential to placemaking. However, levels of provision vary widely throughout the UK, as there is no consistency across the boundary from one place to another. And when you cross from one area to another, it can be difficult if you need to use the toilet, because one may have some, the other may not. There is no legal obligation for toilet provision in the UK, so we have no consistent policy or strategy across our regions. And there is also no agency assuming responsibility. Should it be the responsibility of the Department of Transport to support mobility? Should it be a responsibility of the Department of Health, because it is a contribution to public health? Should it be the responsibility for the Department of Communities, because they are essential for communities? With no one taking overall responsibility, we have a bit of an issue. So I've talked a lot about the interior of toilets, but what about the exterior? As part of placemaking, should toilets also be points of interest? These were toilets designed by architects in Cambridge in UK, and became known locally as the armadillo and the merry-go-round. So this kind of clues us in that the local community had sort of adopted them in some ways and were favourable for them because they gave them nicknames. More recently, Tokyo has called on a number of architects and designers to build district toilets and distinct toilets, which in turn have become central to the film Perfect Days. And if you haven't seen them, so I'm just nodding at the front, but if you haven't seen Perfect Days, I highly recommend it. It's probably now one of my favourite films. That's how obsessed I am. So if we make toilets distinct places, oh, that's Tokyo, sorry, I completely forgot to move the slide on. Oh, well, you'll have to watch Perfect Days to see it. So if we make toilets distinct places to visit, how do we ensure that they are accessible? Here's an accessible toilet, but to me, it's the perfect example of design getting it wrong. For example, ta-da! Okay, so I'm a wheelchair user, I'm coming into the toilet, I'm coming in to use the toilet. There's a bin in this space. This is what's known as the transfer space. This is where people in wheelchairs come in, and they turn around, and they can't do it because there's a bin here. So they either come in, see the bin, and leave and find someone, if they're independent wheelchair users, which if they can be, they want to be, they have to go and find somebody to come in and move the bin, effectively disrupting their independence. So somebody's then come in and used the bin. So they've moved the bin, they've been able to get on the toilet. I normally have a chair here, there we go, and watch me sit on the toilet. I do performance too. So, sitting on the toilet, da 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 da, yep, right, finished. Oh, can't reach the toilet paper. I should be a little bit over a bit more. Oh, but I can't reach the toilet paper because I have something wrong with my hands. Because this big toilet paper drum is considered considerably inaccessible. When you pull the toilet paper, it will roll up into the drum, but the less toilet paper there is, the more the end of the toilet paper gets caught up in the drum. And if you have poor dexterity, you can't get your hand up there to get the toilet paper. If you have a big hand, you can't get up there to get the toilet paper. So I'm quite dexterous. I sometimes can't get up there to get the toilet paper. And sometimes there's a very rough sort of thing to help whip it, and that can cause problems. So all of a sudden you can't actually complete the act of toileting. You want to wipe yourself, you want to clean yourself after using the toilet. But let's say for once it's happened, I've finished, I've decided that I'm going to leave the toilet now, I'm done with my business. I have to transfer back to my wheelchair. This is what people normally do. They transfer back before flushing the toilet. Oh, I can't reach. One, it's too high, and two, it's on the wrong side. How do we know it's on the wrong side? Because the flush should be on the transfer side so that people in their wheelchairs can be sitting in their toilets and reach the flush. You can ask me later why that happens, or why we think that happens. Ta-da! So, we suggest that the design of toilets, like provision, being sort of fragmented amongst multiple providers, is also fragmented in its design. The architecture, both interior and exterior, might meet the guidance and recommendations, but it's also important that products designed for public toilet use are also accessible and inclusive, and that the servicing of toilets, from making sure the toilet paper is there, but also that it can be accessed, that it's not packed in too tight, that it requires too much strength to pull, is also essential. Because just one element of the environment, the product, or the service can make the toilet completely inaccessible to many users. So toilet design needs to consider architecture, plus the products, plus the service to be inclusive. Right, so I'm going to give you a little break from my voice now. I'm going to talk a little bit about Engage, but I'm also going to show some films. So we did a project with the London Mayor. It was part of his Designing London's Recovery programme, and we worked with architects and a number of really supportive people. And we did this project focused on London's toilets in the high street. So it was a post-pandemic initiative to revive the local high street and closed commercial properties. We investigated the reuse of empty spaces and thinking of them as possibilities for public toilets, as all buildings legally have to have toilets. We also explored the opportunity of shared space with startups or community initiatives. And we also designed the project to provide an overlooked element of public health infrastructure. We hoped that Engage would support high street regeneration and, through an inclusive design focus, develop toilet facilities that meet the needs of those who are often excluded. We would do this through engaging directly with the local community through co-design methods.
early so that you can get home and use the toilet, or push the water bottle away so that you won't need to use a public loo. 1 in 5 of us are deterred from venturing out as much as we'd like due to the lack of toilet facilities, and of those of us that do venture out, over half are reducing their fluid intake to prevent the need for a toilet. Engaged is exploring ways of bringing toilets back to the public through repurposing vacant high street units. We're talking with Londoners to understand what a loo-topia would look like for them, addressing accessibility, comfort and dignity to enable them to reconnect with their high streets and local community. To do this, we're working with local council officers to understand the barriers, to overcome them together. Additionally, we'll be running activities within a London community to co-design solutions which can be replicated in other boroughs to benefit. This is everyone's problem. Young, old, able and disabled, for all cultures and genders. Therefore, we will seek new connections through community networks to ensure all voices are heard. Our final engage model will be shared through our regeneration network to reach decision makers in local governments, as well as through the London press.
So, an engaged public toilet space would be inclusively designed. It would take into consideration continence concerns, neurodiversity, limited dexterity, wheelchair use, mobility, visual and auditory impairments. It would be co-designed with local people to consider age and cultural demographics and demand for specific facilities. Our facilities template is for fully enclosed gender-neutral toilets with basins, but it would also consider local demand for additional facilities such as changing places toilets, squat toilets and female-only space. Toilets are by law in every building, and the engaged model explored partnering with local businesses and organisations for shared community space, so finding buildings that were closed down and reopening them and using community sort of regeneration schemes to actually get them restarted, offering people opportunities for business startups as long as they provided toilet provision. But we also saw engaged to provide But we also saw engaged provide critical public health infrastructure through access to toilets. As we experienced in the pandemic, both when we tried to get outdoors and be active, without toilet facilities, they often ended up with a lot of street fouling. And as well as being a place for hand washing to maintain levels of hygiene and to reinstate access to drinking water, which is a big initiative of the London Mayor. Engage could also provide additional operational wellbeing spaces, such as infant feeding and maybe even a shower. In the retail space, it could be switched, turned on open out of hours to provide a base for public health services, such as pop-up clinics or support for rough sleepers or welfare services to support revellers in the nighttime economy. So here's another little film about the work.
Engaged is working with Londoners to understand what our public toilet facilities could be doing better to support us all in getting out and about with confidence, knowing that you can go when you need to go. With many cultures, many ability needs, and many ages coming together in this place we call home, what is needed to ensure that everyone feels safe and comfortable when accessing or using a public toilet? We are speaking with experts and advocates within areas such as age, ability, faith and culture, women's rights, LGBTQ+ communities, night workers and delivery drivers, as well as the general public, to find out what they would like to see in their high street toilets to accommodate their specific needs. These workshops provide a space for individuals to share their experiences and opinions to inform solutions for change. This is vital in ensuring our high streets serve our communities and in making it a safe space for businesses to thrive, so that everyone can enjoy everything that their borough has to offer. By listening to each other and sharing stories, we can learn and come together in redesigning our high streets, making sure there is always a loo for you and a Lutopia for all at the heart of our high street.
Yep, last slide. Engaged, we developed it in London, for London, and it's been taken up outside of London, which goes to show that it's quite good for us because smaller towns have really become interested in the model, but at the moment London, the cost of property, etc. is somewhat limiting the exposure. Anyway, this is the second to last slide, sorry. Future inclusive toilets, making your provision fit for purpose. How can you do it? Well, we suggest that you involve communities in design decisions, especially disabled people, older people and families. That you design for the majority, not the minority. That you collaborate with other providers to ensure that you have equity of provision, especially when you're considering publicly accessible toilet provision. That you ensure architecture plus product plus service are inclusive and accessible. That you provide information and clear signage. That you ensure facilities are well maintained and cleaned regularly. And that you consider interesting architecture. Make toilets a talking point, a place to visit in themselves. Maybe even develop a public toilet strategy for Warsaw. So thank you so much for your attention, for your patience where I deal with multiple technologies and everything, and microphones. All of the publications that I mentioned are available on Tinkle, our website. And if you want to contact me, you might wake up in the middle of the night going, I have a question about toilets. And so you can send it to me, because I love questions about toilets, at ptru-hhcd@rca.ac.uk. Thank you so much, everyone.
Is this a good time to ask you a question? Hi, my name is Sophia and I'm a newly elected city councillor, and space accessibility is one of my greatest interests. And I am an anthropologist too, so I was wondering if in your opinion, we can safely assume that across European countries, everything that tackles prejudice, local customs, etc., can we safely assume that it is universal enough for us to brutally copy your research and your design for other countries?
I would say no, because every country has a cultural consideration.
This is my question, I think.
Yeah. You can't just replicate what we've done. You have to take it. You have to make it culturally relevant to you, because we are, the UK, very secular country, sort of embracing gender neutrality and everything, but in other countries that might not be acceptable yet. So to make those changes, but in design, thinking about how you might shift to that later. So in countries that maybe aren't so open to gender neutral provision, use the same design, make it gender segregated, but think towards for a future where you can just change a sign on the door without having to redesign everything. So there is an element of future thinking required. You know, how is society going to change in 5, 10 years' time, sort of thing, and what will the situations? You know, I can't speak for everybody in this room, but I know personally I continually hope for a progressive society. But in some societies we seem to be standing still and not progressing. So it's up to the culture, definitely.
Okay, so we definitely need to put up a team of design researchers. Thank you.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Jest chyba jeszcze przestrzeń na jedno pytanie.
I have the question, do you trace the problem which I trace many times in Poland in some public facilities, that there is a long line to the toilet and then you discover that there is only women, that the number of the cabins is not enough, while in the men toilet there is no line because we use urinals, or so then it is. And also I don't know how it's in the United Kingdom, but in Poland there is already discriminating law, because it is written that every cubicle for 20 women, and one cubicle for every 20 women, and one cubicle plus one urinal for 35 men. And also, as urinal is smaller, quite often the proportions are even worse. So did you also tackle this problem?
Yes, we've looked at this. In the UK, space is divided equally between men and women when it comes to toilet design. So take a space, divide it in half, and of course they can get 3 cubicles in the women's, 2 cubicles and 5 urinals in the men, effectively doubling the provision. So there's moves to kind of either limit the space, that we give more space to women in the actual architectural plan, or again thinking about the all-access, universal as the government's calling it, gender neutral as we tend to call it, provision, where everybody has their own cubicle. We haven't done the research on this because we're not mathematicians, but we know some researchers who've done some queue timing research on this, and what they've found is that this form of all-access enclosed cubicles decreases the queue time for women, but increases the queue time for men. So make of that as what you will.